Learn how a CEO can level up their leadership skills to make their company more successful. Winning with Amir Shami, CEO of Rotaflow Fire and Utility Systems, on today's episode of the Executive Wins Podcast. Welcome to the Executive Wins Podcast, where senior leaders share their biggest wins so you can get inspired and grow your business. Here's your host, Gordon Shepherd. Welcome to the Executive Wins Podcast, where senior leaders share their biggest wins so that you can get inspired and grow your business. I'm your host, Gordon Shepherd. And to kick off the show, I want to share a leadership lesson that I learned from Teresa Spinelli, CEO of the Italian Center Shop, on episode 59. She shared a useful pond analogy, as in, during the first 50 years in her company, management always blamed the fish in the pond for what went wrong. If there was a mistake, somebody often got fired. It was a top-down approach. But after she took over as CEO, she asked, what if the problem isn't the fish, but what if it's the store, the department manager, or what if it's me? And then she installed a bottom-up approach that created the right pond for her employees to thrive, which has helped them to grow the business to more than $130 million in annual revenue, and they'll soon be opening their 6th store. And that's just one of hundreds of leadership lessons that you'll learn when you listen to past episodes on the Executive Wins Podcast. Another reason to listen? Well, the Executive Wins Podcast won the Best New Podcast Award in the Quill Podcasting Awards in its first year of production. And thanks to you, the Executive Wins Podcast has more than 50,000 views on YouTube and over 24,000 minutes of watch time, along with having more than 2,000 downloads on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen. Featuring mission-driven leaders sharing their biggest wins so that you can get inspired and grow your business. That's what you get on the Executive Wins Podcast. On today's episode, you'll learn how a CEO can level up their leadership skills to make their company more successful. Winning with Amir Shami, CEO of Rotaflow Fire and Utility Systems. I also want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by our leadership team workshop called The Executive Alignment Advantage, Building a Leadership Team that Delivers Results. In this workshop, leaders learn a proven system to help them consistently make better decisions so they can achieve their goals. It's called The Anatomy of a Win, to help everyone on your team understand the strategy, work plan, people, operations, and results behind every major project that you take on. Imagine what would happen if every leader on your team is fully aligned and working hard to turn your goals into results. So if you want to break down silos and build a high-performance leadership team that actually makes your company more profitable, then get in touch with me directly at gord@executivewins.com. That's gord@executivewins.com. And now on to today's show. We are lucky to be joined by Amir Shami, CEO of Rotaflow Fire and Utility Systems, Western Canada's commercial and industrial fire protection solutions specialists. You can learn about their work at rotaflow.ca. That's rotaflow.ca. On this episode, you'll learn about Amir's leadership journey, from having a fact-based, information-driven approach as a project manager to actually becoming a well-rounded CEO who supports people and wants to build a legacy business that will help many future generations. You'll also learn how Amir practices a less is more approach, which helps him and his team to cut through the noise and take action. In addition, you'll find out how Amir and his team have been able to diversify their customer base to ensure sustainability, along with how they continually invest in innovation and people to actually make Rotaflow highly competitive. This episode is a masterclass for any senior leader who really wants to learn how to grow their skills and become more authentic as they grow their companies. I also want to remind you that this interview follows a specific format that I created called The Anatomy of a Win to help you learn the strategy, work plan, people, operations, and results behind every business win that you hear on this show. I really do hope that you can use this approach to reach your next business milestone. And now here's Amir Shami with his executive win. Amir, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Garth. Thanks for having me.
Well, I think we are very lucky to have you here. I remember meeting one of your colleagues at a business leader awards event where your company's won an award, and it was so funny because he threw me into. I was like, "What do you do?" He's like, "Well, if you have a big fire in your industrial setting, we suppress that in 2 seconds." And I'm like, what does that mean? Because I'm not an engineer and I don't know the core of your work. And I know I've just been very limited, even in what I describe. But I was fascinated to learn about that. But then, of course, to learn about how much you as a leader have given back to the community, all the different things that you've done over time, the sort of the rise in your leadership that we're going to learn a little bit about here today as well, in terms of leading the company. You know, we're just very lucky to have you here. So I really appreciate that you've taken the time. But a lot of people haven't met you. So if you had to introduce yourself, what would you say?
Well, my name is Amir Shami, and I'm currently running Rotaflow Fire and Utility Systems. We are a group of company. Uh, we have an engineering leg, which does engineering and fabrication skits, and also we have construction team as a subsidiary, which we have industrial presence in oil sand in Fort McMurray. We also have commercial team, which doing a lot of mechanical contracting in Western Canada, in Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, Yukon, and Vancouver Island.
Remarkable. And what strikes me about what you've just described, and again, we wouldn't have time to say to go through all the details, you're problem solvers in your specific area, and you've done a lot of great work in oil sands and beyond. Is that fair?
Correct. We position ourselves as a solution provider, and obviously having engineering background helps to provide those customized solution for the clients. It's not just a commoditized service, it's an added value solution-based support for our clients.
And I can hear it. You would be in working with your clients, which would be, I'm sure, some of the biggest players in the oil game, in a sense, you know, and you would be able to give them proper advice that fits in and makes them more profitable, moves their strategy forward. Is that the level that we're talking about when you say solutions provider?
True. Our tagline is empowering success through fire and utility services. So we're trying to give them that comfort that they can focus on their own core business. Either they are in the oil and gas or in institutional or warehousing or any area that they are. They don't want to deal with a lot of bells and whistles. So we're offering one-stop shop service, which often starts with design base and engineering service, and then goes to procurement, fabrication, construction, commissioning and startup. And ultimately, in some occasions, we do service and long-term maintenance.
Well, how lucky to be in the room with you and your engineers, do you know what I mean, when the solutions are being provided, because they would be very comfortable. And then what you're providing goes way beyond. If I said one aspect of your business, which is fire suppression, I think there's many others, again, that we would talk about. The implications for them kind of having this not core part of their service taken away, you know, taken off their plate, in a sense, when you do it well. Rotaflow has been doing this for quite a while. Is that fair?
Right. Yeah, we started 1995 as an engineering company. We used to do a lot of instrumentation, electrical, and process safety. 10 years later, we start pivoting into execution, and we did some inspection maintenance. And later on, we got some construction team in Fort McMurray, and then when we expanded to other provinces. 2015 and 16, when oil and gas started slowing down, we realized that diversification is not luxury, it's a necessity. And we tried a couple of times. We failed forward, uh, and then we kept repeating that. Currently, oil and gas is less than half of our business, and we have eggs in different baskets. So we're working with a large or diverse pool of clients, from pulp and paper, potash, general contracting, institutional, brownfield projects, greenfield projects, and sometimes design-only services for some clients.
Interesting. And so, if we're an engineering firm and we see the writing on the wall, this sounds more like a bit of vertical integration. Do you know what I mean? Where we're going to bolt in other pieces and then have even more value for the clients because you're able to not just be at that engineering level, but you're actually able to make sure that it goes well and to a high standard. Is that fair?
True. We identified this as a gap and potential for our space. Most of the general contractors are already integrated. That's why they call them GC. But when it comes to the subtrades, often they are fragmented. We do have some like a plumbing or sprinkler fitting, electrical contractors. They just provide that execution piece. Also, we have some specialized engineering firms that they either provide multidiscipline or single discipline engineering services. But often clients are looking for simplicity. They don't want to have multiple buyers or multiple construction managers to look after all the scopes. So they hire the GCs. The GCs hires the mechanical or electrical contractors, and those contractors they hire subcontractors. And these are adding layer of complexity, miscommunication, even cost increase. Everyone has its own markup. So we felt that we can integrate this fragmented space and offer a one-stop shop. This model exists in some other area, but not necessarily in the orthodox environment, which is a trade space. So we had to learn a lot of things and establish a lot of things because there are some barriers also for that integration. So in last 10 years, particularly, we have to internalize a lot of process and system like ERPs and CRMs and onboarding and HR and supply chain and all those job costing necessities that we do have. Also, we had to train our people because if you want to have a project managers that they are capable of managing construction, procurement, engineering, and all the aspects of projects, they need to have that vast knowledge. So often we don't see that level of training either in the trade colleges or in the university degrees. So we had to pick and choose from each one and internally develop those capacities to be fit for our strategy model.
Well, congratulations. It sounds like you got a bunch of Olympic athletes on your team. Do you know what I mean? Where you've trained them up to that high level, cross-train them. So this sort of, we're hearing really screaming loud, why Rotaflow? And like you said, you take the headache away. You're actually improving their costing because you've reduced margin moments instead of multiple people kind of taking a piece of the pie. You're able to sort of, again, vertically integrate that. And then along with a decade of experience, there's kind of doing it over and over again where you kind of get it right. So I'm guessing the clients have enjoyed working with you. You would have repeat success in there that I'm sure we could talk about as well. And then your journey in Rotaflow, you didn't start at the top, I don't think. Is that fair? Where did you start and how did you grow in your leadership through Rotaflow?
Yeah. Well, in the last 30 years, a lot of evolvement happened in Rotaflow. Myself included, 10 years ago, I was a project manager. I was working on some design and execution projects in Fort McMurray. Then an opportunity came. I applied for VP position, and after a couple of years, it was a time for my partner at the time for succession planning. And I put my name forward and put some effort. And when he retired, I took over as a president CEO. And now that's my goal for next 10 years to build the succession planning for myself, bring more partners, like-minded people, and make this as a platform that all the team they can grow together and make a legacy.
Congratulations. What a wonderful company to have that forward thinking. You can hear that you're not making it up. You've actually been handed a bit of legacy values and succession already that's going to allow you to be even stronger. And it sounds like this company might get another 30 or 40 years in the future if you kind of get things right. Is that fair?
I hope so. My mentor mentioned eventually the business is people and projects. So people has to be built internally and projects, we have to scout them externally. So without developing that capacity, we cannot try, we cannot expand.
wonderful to hear, and you can hear again the thoroughness that makes it a long-lasting company this far, and again setting up that soup mix to go forward in the future. This is great. So we know a lot about your company. We know a little bit about you and your journey in terms of how you've sort of been at one level of the company, now risen up to lead the company, and how you're going to lead a little bit in the future. At this point, I always like to ask, if you had to describe your biggest win in all this work over time, what would that win be, and how would you describe it?
Well, win can be not just as a pinnacle moment, it can be a process, it can be a fluid process. And I would say understanding the journey for myself and my team, that was a winning piece for myself. When I was solely involved in the design and project management, I was very factful and practical. Then my leadership journey started with dealing with people, and then I realized that uh, I have to understand them, and part of that I have to understand myself, and that self awareness started, and I had to peel off all those layers and trying to find out why I'm acting the way that I'm acting or who I am. So entrepreneurship is a combination of struggling, pressure, rewards, and dynamic of feelings. One day you're super excited, another day you're feeling miserable. So trying to understand yourself, go back, and often you have to go back to your childhood and understand all those traumas and motivation pieces, and trying to rebuild yourself forward to the present. And by understanding that dynamic, I can relate to other people and understand their motivation. Often, when you see an argument in a project management or job costing meeting, is not just about the margins or numbers. It's all about two people believe that they are not appreciated enough or their voice is not heard. There's always some hidden agenda, and there's feeling behind all those. So I would say that being more mindful about myself and my people around myself, and also how externally people are fighting to be recognized, appreciated. And if you can address that piece, other materialistic or uh, business related things can also follow.
Wow. Thank you for doing the hard work. I always feel lucky to meet leaders like you because it wasn't this easy to say when you started understanding the journey, right? Then, and so if you say the win is understanding the journey, and then you really eloquently described, where you were at, I'm factful in a sense, and then how the evolution has occurred and how that's not only made it better for your team, but in fact more profitable overall for the impacts that it would have had, because you can see now you're mixing together sort of the technical excellence with the people excellence along the way. Well, that really sets the table for describing what I call the anatomy of a win, which is where we look at the strategy, the work plan, the people, operations, and results behind the win. Strategically, there's something about understanding the journey that, before you did understood the journey, there would have been some pain points or something. But then there's something about the values, the vision, the mission that you would have gotten onto, the goals that you had. Any highlights strategically about why understanding the journey was important?
Well, I'm referring to a book, probably you know that, Patrick Lencioni, The Five Dysfunctional. And in that pyramid of accountability, everything starts with the bottom line of the trust. And when you have established that trust, then you can go to uh, healthy confrontation, and then to commitment, and then accountability, and the result. And the result can be either financial or strategic, market share, sales, whatever KPI or OKR you may define. So that's often what we forget about, that lots of strategic plannings are happening in the top half of that pyramid, which is what are the KPIs, what are the margins, goals, objectives, market shares, quarterly sales, conversion rates, growth margin, overhead. Then we come back to see about the lack of accountability. The emails not get responded very fast, or the transparency is not there, or the core values are not properly maintained. Then you go one layer bottom, you see it's all about trust. And trust can be cultivated with being open, honest, and vulnerable, which is a counterintuitive, because when you are a leader, you have to have, or at least that's a common perception, that you have to have charisma. And they feel that charisma is that just being safe or grumpy or ignoring people. But when you are authentic and you have that openness and honesty and vulnerability, and you have that true benevolence approach to our people, that simmers that culture of trust. And then by trust, people feel that they can rely on you, and they can say that, no, I don't know this, I can't. And they don't promise something which they cannot deliver, and then result a further disappointment. So being able to understand that process, I think that's one of the toughest journey that myself and other my leadership team had to go through that, and build that layers internally.
Well, and just to pick on you for a second, from engineering and fact based, ways of being to actually do what you're talking about, which is to articulate what is really full strategic planning. When we think about whole organizations beyond, like you said, beyond the KPIs, beyond the profit margins and those things, are this base, and you've done the work, and this 5 dysfunctions of a team is one of the bases, and I'm sure you have many other inspirations that you can draw on for getting that to go. Anytime we have a strategy, and I can hear the values and the whole strategy that you've described from a highlight point of view, we need a work plan or a timeline in a sense. There was a moment when maybe you weren't as authentic. There was a moment when you had to examine where you were at and then find the tools along the way. Would you describe this journey as easy sailing, or is it peaks and valleys along the way when you decided to kind of get this started? How would you describe that journey along that timeline?
Well, you may not always be successful, and you may have some failures. But another thing that I learned is be patient, and don't lose your faith. Everybody says that never give up, but often they're not describing what does it mean to not give up. There are days that you just need to drag yourself to the office, have a cup of coffee, and just grind and just do one piece every day. So when you trust the process and you continue despite of the results might be up and down. I start detaching myself from the results and only focusing on the efforts. And my calendar is now packed with meetings and commitments, which probably relate to next year. And when I go to the hallway and I saw everybody is happy because they just got a purchase order or they completed a project, I like it. I smile. But I remember when I was planning for that last year or year before, because a lot of business development, networking, establishment, certification, all other prerequisite steps to bring us to this phase. So, and you may not see the results immediately, but if you believe on the journey and the destination, then you are not looking for instant gratification. You just say that, well, eventually it's going to be paid off. You just need to do your task today.
Interesting. Trust the process. How many leaders have had to drag themselves to work on a tough day, in terms of, and just get that cup of coffee in and do the next thing? And isn't that really, again, super wise in terms of we're lucky to benefit from the heavy lifting that you've done, from building self-awareness to implementing, and your
Mhm.
journey's not over. I can hear you're a lifelong learner, and this is going to continue, and it'll be an even more detailed conversation probably in a year or in 5 years or whatever that kind of looks like. When I say the timeline, you mentioned there was a time maybe before self-awareness to a certain degree. What year would it have been that it started to dawn on you, like, oh, I better start to figure this out from a leadership perspective? Was it 10 years ago, 5 years ago? What year would that have started?
Well, it goes back to my childhood. Uh, well, by Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENFP, and ENFPs are more feelers and intuitives, and they're supposed to go to arts and design, not to engineering. But my dad was an engineer, and he pushed all of the kids to go to engineering. Five of us, four brothers, one sister, all engineers. So he was a very democratic dictator. He said that, well, you can choose what kind of engineering, but you have to go to engineering. That was the level of freedom that he had. And I was struggling always into just going through physics and maths and integral differential and all things. I always had that creativity outside the box thinking side, which I felt that I'm not belonging to this space. The first like a 10, 15 years of my career, I was a good engineer, but always I had those crazy ideas when you go to the meetings of what if you just do this way or that way. But then later on, I realized that maybe that's actually my superpower because you're an outlier. When everybody goes Zeke, you go Zach. And you can supplement that being different with some additional knowledge and become a leader. That's why after my master's degree in electrical engineering, I'm working almost 10 years. I decided to go to get a business degree and I got my MBA and I become very serious about the leadership. And I felt that now having that foundation of the technical background and adding more uh, people skill like HRs and leadership and business development and organizational behavior and that kind of stuff, it actually can add value to the process. So what I want to conclude is that often something that you perceive as a weakness is actually not just a intrinsic weakness, is that maybe your superpower. You just need to redefine it or wait for the right time. If you are dyslexic or you have ADHD, maybe you have a super creative mind. Or if you are introverted and you go to a business development event and everybody's other social butterfly and bubbly, and you just need to have your own space, maybe actually you are a good planner, thinker. So not having the feeling of shame, I think that's the most important internal voice that you need to have. And I had to build that one.
And you had to
Because
build it because you had your democratic dictator in early days, I'm sure with good intentions. Do you know what I mean? Like with that kind of thing. And yet here you were round into a square peg or whatever you want to call it, going off. And thank you for putting in the multi-decades to pull all this together, because how lucky we are when leaders spend this time investing in their journey. And you're not talking about reading one book. You're talking about multi-years, doing degrees, putting in the work, gaining the awareness, falling down, getting up. And you would, if we went back in some of those moments in time when you were more fact-based, you would talk about things that, were tougher. And then now you're at this interesting moment in time getting to lead a strong organization in this with this multi-diverse brain where you can be in all the conversations, knowing that you're pulling a full value chain together. And so the timeline really is your whole life, from what I'm hearing, to get to this moment in time. And again, it will continue down the road. Strategy, work plan. Anytime we have a win, we also need people. And we've learned quite a bit about you in your journey along the way and your attitude towards things. You are a self-learner to a certain degree, and you have awareness with that creative side bent in, because that whole thing of straightforward engineer for the rest of your life to retirement wasn't going to be your path. You had to challenge yourself. How would you describe your attitude through this lifelong journey to get to where you are now to get this win?
well, the key is to have that scout mindset. Uh, you know, not always be defensive about whatever fact comes on your way. You detach yourself from the fact truth of the any feedback and try to see what is the good in any event, and not constantly try to prove something to yourself or anybody else. Then you have an opportunity to learn. And every bad event is not just become a catastrophe or euphoria or something. It's just a piece of information that you can position yourself better next time. So the success can be a compounding process of those small right decision that you do every single time when you learn something. Like a groundhog day. Every single time, you just position yourself better. But in the absence of external validation, you need to have internal validation, and that internal validation should come with your inner voice. Uh, Religious people may call it fate or whatever, or at least you can say that that mindset, that spiritual mindset that you develop. I haven't seen any successful leader, executive that doesn't have that inner voice, that they don't need to people applause or uh, congrat them externally. They just need to have that fulfillment, internal satisfaction. And I think developing that is that reactor that internally can and fuel your engine and move you forward.
Interesting. So be a scout, be open. I've heard you use the words vulnerability, gain those skills, and then the inner voice piece, which so many leaders suffer with. And that thing of investing to work out the inner voice piece. And like you said, most successful leaders who have those balanced lives, at least, have done that as well in terms of bolting in all the pieces. Masterclass, this is so good along the way here. You said mentor in there as well. So when you talk about people to, if you're going to talk about understanding the journey, this mentorship thing, you were also, when did you seek out a mentor, and how would you describe that connection in helping you understand the journey?
Yeah, I was lucky to have mentors earlier in my career. And even one of my mentors, he passed away. He was 94 or something like that. And he used to always send email, and at the bottom of his email, he said, "Bill, the student." And said, "You are a student of life, no matter how old are you." And he mentioned that you need to have three people in your life: one a mentor, one a mentee, one a peer. No matter how old you are, you need to have a mentor to learn about uh, something that you don't know. You need to have a mentee to try to pass the knowledge, then crystallize in your mind better, and you can make it more coherent. And a lot of times you learn better when you're trying to carry forward that knowledge. And you need to have peers that don't judge you, and you can share knowledge and feel where you are in that journey. But I think that's very essential in life, no matter you are in an executive role, leadership, or in any professional setting you are. You're better to surround yourself with these three levels and tiers.
Very, very clear and very actionable for the people that are listening to this to say, yeah, wait, do I have a mentor? Do I have a mentee? Do I have, and then again, a longer journey once you put all those things into place, and how rich to be able to get that, those suggestions along the way. And then it sounds like you're implementing them in your lifelong learning career that you're on now. I don't mean to get on to make it too long. There are family in here somewhere that's important as the people that contribute to this. There's the team that you've built, do you know what I mean, at work, as other sort of people along the way. Did I miss anybody, just in case you need to mention, if you're going to understand the journey, any other critical pieces in there that we need to at least mention kind of who was involved?
Yeah, well, you need to give to receive. And often your circle start with your immediate family. You cannot be just individualist. And one of the best trusted circle is to start with your siblings and cousins and others. I was very fortunate to surround myself with my siblings, a strong family that I have all here in Edmonton. And there are moments that you just need to talk to some people without judging you. And they have seen you in ups and downs. So establishing that trustful relationship professionally and personally within family is very important. And the trust, one of the key elements of trust building is consistency. You have to be predictable, and you have to not attack them, their personality or their interest. You just need to have always that benevolence approach toward them. They may not like it at the point, but 2, 3 years, 5 years from that moment, they said, "Oh, well, he really wanted something good for us." And that meant when I'm talking about mentorship, is not necessarily a formal Monday morning 90 minutes call. It can be just touch base to someone that you can choose to not call, but you just do call to see how they are doing, how they're feeling. And people go through a lot of challenges, a lot of ups and downs, and marriages and divorces, unemployments and bankruptcies, and care about people, being compassionate. And that's That's in conjunction to that mentorship mindset, which I mentioned earlier.
How nice to hear that trust is not just an exercise through Patrick Lencioni's work, but in fact a through line, a value set that goes along with you and your family and your cousins and those people in your life as well. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful strategy, work plan, people. Operationally, if we're going to have, we need to know kind of operationally what does it take to get a win. In this case, understanding the journey is the win. Operationally, you started to seek information. You sought the process. You worked with a mentor or many. You had things to put in to operationalize understanding the journey. What sort of highlights from your to operationalize this would you describe along the way?
Well, in our strategy, we have three pillars. And the top starts with the purpose. What is the purpose of the company? Then we have the pillars of what we do, who we are, how we do, and where we do that service. But the key part of the strategy comes from the foundation, which is down the bottom of the strategy. And it has two layers. One is that core values that are essential when you hire or let go or promote or do any performance review, but also the people and process. What kind of processes you have? Is it your culture more penalizing any mistakes or innovation, or has enough tolerance to learn from it and fall forward? I think a lot of successful companies, even mostly down the border, they started by putting budget for trying things. And when the market is very slow, like what happened in last 5 years in Alberta, then companies are running on a very slim margin. And when you don't have enough luxury of growth margin, then you don't have enough space for people trying things, doing different initiatives, business development, leadership. And when you don't try, you don't learn from it. So the culture of the company should always set aside some space. Either it can be budget or the way that the leadership react for people trying things. But also it has to be guardrail to not cultivate chaos, because if the companies don't have that level of discipline and control and consistency, it's gonna shake up, and that vibration gonna derail the company from their purpose and goal. So it is something that has to be taught through by senior leadership to internalize the accountability, consistency, result. I think one of the key challenges that most of the companies these days are struggling is results. They do all these layers and uh, like project management and portfolio management and everything, but eventually the definition of the result is different from what client was perceived and what they deliver. And I think it has to be go through the culture of the company by the way that leaders are thinking and acting and exemplifying. It
Interesting.
takes time.
Yeah, and so I love hearing about that investment in up times and down times, but in a controlled way, in the way that the leadership team kind of is able to dig into. You reminded me back to when I did my MBA in my early 40s. One of the case studies was around Procter& Gamble. Procter& Gamble had a 3% of, I'm not sure, top line or bottom line of investment in innovation. And when they had a CEO change one time and he reduced that investment, suddenly you're missing out on Swiffer. Do you know what I mean? You're missing out on these billion-dollar product lines because they're simply their pace of innovation and what they had invested in up times and down times that made them who they were. It broke that rhythm. But you're saying invest at the right level in those innovative things along the way that help your company to grow, to operationalize those things. That's wonderful. So we can hear that sort of, permeating the entire story that we're talking about here. We talked about strategy, work plan, people, operations. Finally, there are results. So quantitatively, what would you say quantitatively the impact of understanding the journey has had? Would you say that it's hit the bottom line? Would you say that it's hit the satisfaction scores? Like, what sort of numbers do you associate with understanding the journey?
Yeah. Well, before I answer in that, I want to add to what you just described. 3% these days is just the bottom line of many companies in Alberta, sadly. 10, 15 years ago, maybe they had better margins, double digits. but especially industrial contractors that operating in the oil sand, they barely even make 5, 6, 7%. And how you can even set aside half of your earnings for those like uh, innovative initiatives. So that's one of the things that policymakers should understand better. When they push the companies to the bone, they also kill innovation and entrepreneurship. Often they believe that ratcheting up the cost, either the cost of labors through union or whatever uh, uh, procurement structure or others, it can be absorbed and borne by the company. The companies don't need to enjoy big margins. It's not about that all the margin going to go to the profit sharing. Actually, part of that is budgeted for those initiatives, the risk-taking initiatives. But coming back to what you mentioned about the quantitative results. So I started to observing the patterns, and and Tony Robbins talked about it. Recognize the patterns, use the patterns, and if you can create patterns. Uh, and there are some patterns in last at least 10, 15 years in our market, either through the merger and acquisition and consolidation or through the companies that expanding or imploding through the market. But being able to position the organization properly in each of these waves, I think that's critically important. When, in fact, we did much better when the market is contracting in the time of recession, in the time of pandemic, or when the oil and gas comes down. Because when things are great, even you are a piece of log, you can sail. You don't need a sailor. But when the market is bad, that's how good companies can steer and position themselves. So that's how we historically have done. When the market is tough, we have better control on the cost, project management, time, scope, training, and everything else, and we position ourselves better. And when the market is recovering, we have less competition because we just weathered the storm and survived. But at the same time, you cannot just always stay in that kind of stable position. You have to have that progressive mindset. But I think that when you recognize this pattern and you start allocating your resources properly and trying to just do one thing better every day. 1% better is like 37.8% annually, and that's how you gradually can see the results. And result is not necessarily always monetary, the financials. You will see a lot of depth into the company. You're strategically diverse. You have different strong intangible assets like your leadership team, your brand, your reputation, and employee satisfaction. We spend more time in the office than probably spending at home. So if you have enough or long-term retention in the company, I think that's a win. Even if you are underperforming financial or you're on a par, but still people feel great working with this company. I think these are all the quantitative that you can start scoring when you look at holistically from outside.
And isn't that great to hear how robust your approach? You have a robust approach. You're not just, you know what I mean? You're not just on a profit-seeking missile kind of thing. You're trying to build out all aspects of what, a holistic company can do, which then, like you mentioned, can weather $100 oil. You don't have to be that smart, right, to sort of go make money. But, $40 oil to make it through with a trust-based team where the understanding at the leadership level is there, and then that permeates through the organization, which allows you to, like you said, get through these storms, and then you get the benefit of coming out of those things along the way. And that gives continuity over time. And so it takes all that sort of time to, like you said, recognize the pattern, build the pattern, and make sure that that's there along the way. That's the quantitative side. Qualitatively, you've already mentioned it. You said the employees are there. You can look at the leadership team, know that they're developing and doing that kind of thing. Qualitatively, results-wise, how does it feel to sort of, talk about this win at this time in your journey?
Well, I value sustainability over other parameters. I think the key purpose of organization, which has a right culture, is to make sure it's sustainable. Because if you're just looking for windfalls or short-term profits, I've seen a lot of boom and bust, at least in the last 10 years. So being able to build that organizational resiliency, that's key. And part of that is maybe not be too perfect, because when you're too perfect, you are fragile, and you can tolerate a certain level of disruption. Then you build organizational resilience, either financial or org chart or anything. You just can absorb those shocks as you move forward. So you have to believe on the long term and in the future. That's very critical. That's very important. Personally, I'm very optimistic about the future of Alberta. I think we are in a very great place to be. We have great natural resources, and I'm sure maybe it takes a couple of years, but when the relationship locally with the rest of the federation improve, we will see that we have a much better strategic position to redeem all these opportunities. So we just need to establish and solidify this foundation. And it sometimes needs to defer that short-term interest to the long-term benefit. We would like to have generational wealth rather than just this year, financial year, or second or next.
Well, and you're getting it done. When I hear someone who's pulling off generational wealth, you're doing it for yourself. It sounds like you're doing it for your family. You're doing it for your company by doing your self journey, getting to this moment, and now to that point where you're looking out. You're able to look outwards and be an influence in that community, and say that you are optimistic at a time when there's a lot of noise in this area. But you've got this through line that you've proven it. And you know now that if you can take this same leadership firmness, in a sense, out to the world, that influence is going to be there as well. Well, what a lucky conversation here that we've got to have here today to learn about you, learn about your company, learn about your wins. I always make sure when I've got leaders like you on the show, just on the way out, if you had like a few sentences to pass along to another leader as they develop in their own leadership journey, what would those kind of few sentences be?
I would say less is more. You have to be, I'm just repeating what you say in my own language, that you have to constantly filter noises. Because often we see that we have to constantly gather secret sauce and knowledge and wisdoms. And often I see that we have analysis paralysis issue. Even in our organization, we see a lot of great engineers and project managers that they are knowledgeable, they are jack of all trades, but often they stop acting. And I would put more faith into just get started and learn in the process, rather than make sure that everything is 100% super duper and there's no risk, because you have to tolerate the risk. Goes back to that resiliency that I mentioned, is that when you have enough grit in the process and you just believe that eventually you will figure it out, so then you just need to act. I think sometimes my greatest superpower is I resist to learn too much detail in a decision-making process. They're going to send a proposal or dealing with a sophisticated project with an industrial client. And constantly in the meeting, I trying to eliminate what doesn't matter and simplify to that core principles. And at the end, help them to conclude based on the like a 80-20 rule that, okay, these are all important details, but not relevant, not significant. And let's go back to that big picture. And I think one of the things I try to help myself and my team is that ability to zoom out, go to that 30,000 feet and see the big picture. When you constantly can zoom out and see the big picture and then zoom in, you start categorizing the priority of the information that you have. So it's not always good to just keep accumulating all those information. because you just create a big ball of information that cripples you. So less is more. You have to be principlist.
Less is more, simplify, take action. We could talk for another 10 hours. What a pleasure. Amir, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Gord, for having me.
Keep it simple, be authentic, and invest in your own leadership journey so you can grow yourself, your team, and your business. That is how Amir Shami and his team win every day. Thank you, Amir, for your inspiring win. And if you enjoyed listening to this episode, then make sure to check out our upcoming episodes, which include how to build a strong leadership team with open communication, trust, and hard work. Winning with CFO Milka Vujanic and CEO Jeff Spiro from Service Realty. And if you're a leader who really wants to learn how the Executive Wins coaching session can help you to grow your confidence and inspire your team, then visit executivewins.com to learn how. You can also subscribe to the Executive Wins newsletter to stay up to date on the podcast, live events, education opportunities, and more. Visit executivewins.com/newsletter to sign up. And if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, and share it with a fellow leader. And don't forget to check out our resources and links in the show notes. And keep listening to the Executive Wins podcast for more inspiring wins that will help you to grow yourself, your team, and your entire business. Thanks for listening to the Executive Wins podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe as we bring you more inspiring wins from outstanding leaders so you can grow your business.